Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. And we are finally here. We are doing the deep dive review of the DLC Wrath of the Druids. Now, before we get started on the review, there's two things I want to discuss first. The first one is, when I originally set out to do my deep dives, it was reviews for main games. But I've decided now to broaden to DLCs and spin-off titles. So when I can, I have a lot of content to build up after 14 years, I will be looking at the smaller spin-off titles like Chronicles, the PSP and DS type titles, Liberations, Bloodlines, Discovery, and also as many DLCs as I can. The only DLCs I've really played, though, is all of Origins, all of Odyssey, the Jack the Ripper DLC, and the Dead Kings DLC, and Freedom Cry. So I am limited to what DLCs I can discuss, but if I've played them, I will discuss them, and we'll have a huge more deep dives for you all to listen to in the future. Second thing before we start is a thank you to everyone who supported me in making this content. A few months ago, I didn't think I would be able to continue making Assassin's Creed content due to a real life struggle, so I just assumed I wouldn't be pushing ahead as much. But with all your support, I am able to continue making content, so yay! And I'm really thankful for it. Biggest thank you as well to the Mentors Guild. They give me access to the DLC, so without their support and give me access to the DLC, I don't think I would have got around to this episode as quick as I have. And boy, am I glad to talk about this episode. So I want to get the elephant out of the room, because everything I say in this episode may come across as controversial, or no, I think the term is hypocritical, because my biggest complaint, and it's a complaint I still have, is that I don't like that the DLC doesn't connect to the endgame lore. But why it comes this hypocritical is because I actually do like it that the DLC doesn't connect to the endgame lore. And to get that elephant out of the room, the best way to explain this is because when I play the DLC, I kind of realised that due to the power level and the story requirements to unlock the DLC so early, this DLC does flow to me and feel a lot better as a filler arc for Eivor's story, and that's not negative. I think it's really perfect that it does that. And I don't think if this DLC, how it's written now, was filled to the brim of Isu lore that we found out at the endgame, I don't think the story impact and Eivor's character development would have hit off as much to me. This is a personal opinion, so I just kind of think that I look at it as a filler story for Eivor's journey in England, and from that light, how it's built, how it plays, it's just perfect without connections to Endgame. If this DLC was to connect with Endgame, I would like to see. I wouldn't really think how the stories now would fit, so they would have to change a few things in my opinion. But looking at how it is now, I love nearly everything about the DLC. There is one huge glaring issue that I just can't get over, but it doesn't hinder my love for the DLC because it's just optional. But I will discuss that later on. So let's look at why I love the DLC. Well, first of all, the story is really cool. It's a really fun little story where you meet the cousin, you travel through Ireland, and you think about a hidden cult. And, it's kind of like a little simple story, but it's really fun. And I think this is why I like it as Eivor's story, because she's getting to know her cousin, she's seeing how he is in Ireland, and she's setting foot in Ireland for the first time, so she's seeing everything fresh. And looking at how fresh Ireland is, this is where I give Ubisoft the biggest props. DLCs can always suffer from copy and pasted locations, and Ireland is just open country, similar to England, but I haven't found, and more people who've looked in depth may correct me, but I've not found any part of Ireland that are copy and pasted from England. So just like Finland and Norway, it's fantastic to see that this island, this DLC, feels like something new. It's fresh. Every new location is going to make you stop and go, oh, that's cool. There's like little effects like rainbows that are not in England. It feels daft, but you're riding along, enjoying the scenery, rain stops, and you see a rainbow. It's a little detail that's fun. I haven't completed the story, so I'm not going to do any story spoilers. I think I've spent about 20 hours in the DLC, so I should be close. But I have been exploring every inch of Ireland as I can. And it's great. The trade system that's been added is really smooth, really simple. You do trade posts, you unlock loot, gear and systems, and it increases the renown factor of Dublin, which you just kind of think as the settlement level for Ravensthorpe. So it's really nice that the DLC isn't just about a story. There is a great mechanic in there for the trade. And Azura, who runs and I think I've just accidentally got her name wrong, so I apologise, but who runs the trade route is amazing. They're a brilliant character. They've got an amazing backstory, amazing bio, and they're just fantastic to listen to. And it's a very nice character. I think when you come to DLCs, you do have the issue of NPCs not being memorable, but they do feel very memorable, and so does Barrid, King Flan, and every other quest NPC I've run into feels memorable, so I'm happy about that. And I know it's broken, but stealth seems to be getting a tiny, and it's not better, but a little bit better. And I feel like the DLC is forcing me to use stealth a lot more. We have the stealth arrow, smoke arrow, which I don't like. I will admit, it's a fantastic ability, it's a lot of fun, but because I'm starting to see that the ability wheel system is not for me, I find myself trailing on the countryside with zero adrenaline, and a ton of guards I just want to drop a smoke arrow on, sneak stealthily and stab them, but I can't. So I feel like to use the arrow, I've got to constantly have adrenaline full, and I barely ever have any adrenaline because I'm always using it for the arrow abilities, but when I'm stealthing. But when I do have full adrenaline, the first upgrade for Smoke Arrow is the best upgrade I've ever had. If you're out in the wild, you can shoot at a guard's foot, and I think I've got about 4 assassinations off, and then as the smoke clears, they're all dead. It's really great for causing distractions in camps. I've used it once to lure a guard away. So as he's got away, I've jumped into some hay. When he's come back to his usual post, I've assassinated him and then dragged him to the hay. I only did that because I realised if I attacked him in the smoke, his body would have alerted more people, and I was not in the mood to fight 20 different guards. The reason why I've been utilising stealth a lot more is the Druids themselves. They have a very weird green mist which affects your screen and makes it a bit blurry, and it could be because I'm playing on a small screen, but because of how much effects going on the screen, I've been disorientated a few times where I've tried to rush on headlong and I've been beaten very fast by 10 different guards I did not know were there because they don't look like normal enemies. They have glowing eyes because of the hallucination effect. So I've realised to do Druid type abilities with smoke, it's best to stealth. Until you run into werewolves. Now I know werewolves cause such a dramatic friction for the community because it's so high fantasy and so divided, but I've got to say that the werewolves are fantastic, and the biggest downside, but downside for me, because I love werewolves and I think they're such a cool character design, I think they're just really intriguing how it works, is that they're not very common. And it's great because I think in my first 4 hours playing, I didn't encounter one. And that is really good because the rest of the DLC just feel grounded. And then suddenly you find one after 4 hours and it destroyed me. It threw a boulder at us, and I was kind of taken back. But I was impressed. I was impressed how there's no logical sign for it to be there. There's just this green mist, and they appear. And this brings up my next positive, and I really feel that this is me just being super positive. My next positive about the green mist is, unlike the daughters of Lurion and, well, the mushrooms can be counted because they're a mushroom, the green mist has a very great in-game lore, canon, whatever you want to call it, reason, and that is, slight spoiler, one cult member, I'm not going to say who, one cult member that you have to face has a note in his possession, and when you read the note, he talks about a fog that can seep into the minds of men, and then it has like ingredients where it uses like bark, mushrooms, and something else, and you throw it into a fire and it creates its fog. And to me, that is a very logical and grounded method to making these hallucinations real. It's not like the game saying, okay, it's an hallucination, deal with it, it's real. It's like the game's telling you it is an hallucination, you have to deal with it, but here's a recipe how the Druids made it, so you know that it's not just game magic, it was something these characters made themselves. So it does have a bit, in my opinion, a grounded and more focused response, which I love. And they're not very common, so that's even better, because I was worried that you just find them randomly in the wild, or you chew on a mushroom and they appear, but the fine fact that this mist is already at an area, you could just walk into it, especially when the Druids around, it's kind of nice because you don't know it's there. And I think there's one time where I walked into a camp thinking it was empty, and I got really destroyed by some boar and some dude that could throw, like, stamp on the ground and it was fire, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had no health anyway. So it took me by surprise, but I was delighted by the surprise. So, negatives? Yeah, the negatives I have is the story's too short. That's just plain and simple. It's too short. I don't know why it's so short, but it just feels like the DLC could be a little more, in my opinion. I have gone over how they could increase it and what they could do, but I don't think there is much they can do. So, but I do think there could have been a bit more to the Druids themselves. They are a fantastic force and a fantastic enemy type as well, but I feel like there could be a little bit more to it. The other thing that I really did enjoy, enjoy first till I realised it is super annoying, which is why it's now a major negative, is the optional stuff is back. Optional objectives in the first game were a bit meh. They were alright. Sometimes they were really irritating to do. Sometimes they were kind of fun to do. But here they are annoying. Like, having them back at first, I wasn't fussed. But now that I've got them back, I actually wish they weren't here. And the reason why I'm putting them down as such a huge negative is because, one, they don't work properly, and two, they don't explain themselves properly. And by that I mean, how can I word it? The best one actually is one I did. It's a ring was stolen. A ring was stolen, so I had to go to the ring from a bandit, and that was all I was said. And the optional objective was something along the lines of no unnecessary kills. Now, I actually didn't really understand what non-necessary kills were, so I just assumed this meant don't go killing any more targets than you need to. So I went to location, it was a monastery, and everyone knows Monastery is a raid location, but I thought I'd stealth it. So I started assassinating guards, and as soon as I assassinated the first guard, I got objective failed. I was like, how is my optional objective failed? So I didn't think about it, killed all the guards, I did the raid, and I looked all around the map for a chest, and I couldn't find one. And it wasn't until I was about to leave the raid that I passed over a guard from that one of my Yoms Vikings must have killed, and it said, interact to pickpocket. And then it hit me. No objectional kills means I have to pickpocket. But the objective didn't say pickpocket. Nothing mentioned pickpocket. I only found that I could pickpocket in Valhalla by accident. I didn't know pickpocketing was in the game. And I failed the optional objective because it wasn't clear enough. It just said no unnecessary kills. But in a raid location that is heavily guarded, how was I supposed to know that I had to find a way to sneak in and pickpocket a guard? So I failed it. And I've not been able to complete one since. My next one that I did was take no damage. And seeing as the detection meter is short in this game, it is difficult to do no damage runs. You're always going to get a stone from somewhere or an arrow you don't realise. And unless you've got insane reaction skills to catch arrows mid-flight, or insane stealth skills that break the game so you can get around unnoticed, I think they're pretty difficult to achieve. If stealth was fixed with no shed AI, where I could hide behind a tree and the arrow people would lose my line of sight, if that could happen, I think it would be a lot easier. But because it's not, I just don't think these objection octaves are working as intended. And that is my biggest negative, is just I want to have so much fun out of the DLC because the pigeon coop stuff are back, so you go to pigeon coop and do missions, but having optional objectives that don't really explain themselves, I have no unnecessary kills, and then throw you into a heavily guarded area where you have to assassinate because it's the only way you've been taught to play Assassin's Creed games. You either assassinate, eavesdrop, or pickpocket, but the game normally tells you you've got to assassinate, eavesdrop, or pickpocket. This game's just like, don't kill anyone. But how am I supposed to do that if you're not telling me there's another way to do it? So it's a picky negative, but it's the only one I've got. Other than that, I think this DLC is fantastic, and I would rate it an 8 out of 10. Could be better if the optional objectives were a bit fixed, if it made a bit more sense. Story could have been a little bit longer for me, but harking back to what I originally said, I think it's the perfect Eivor story type DLC. It's like a filler arc for Eivor, in my opinion. If you connected to the endgame, I think it would be sweet. Not gonna lie, I do want more endgame content. But how the story is written, how the world is designed, how the characters are designed, I just think that the way the DLC is now is just perfect for how it is. Adding connections that we can't see, which is how I think the developers have worded it, is a good way for us to pick apart and see the connections. But if they would just try to force feed us more in-game lore through this DLC and keep the stories they've got, I personally don't think it would work. So I have been talking about Twitter about it, and someone did make a very valid point when before I did optional objectives, I had no negatives. So he made a very valid point about the negatives, so I wanted to read that out. This is by Jake on Twitter, Enraged Gamer, so thank you. His negative take is, the story and the world don't really offer any substantive additions to AC Universe. I don't walk away learning something new. Cool and meaningful like Origins and Odyssey's first DLC, provided, and that disappointed me. And that is actually a good point. I think looking at like it's Eivor's story and a filler DLC, I think it just kind of puts into perspective what it really is. But expecting it to be a DLC that opens up the AC lore and universe, again, I do wish it did. I'm not going to lie, I play these games for the lore, for the story. And I do, as I'm going to keep repeating, I do wish it did have that connection, that lore, that tie-in. But how it's been written, how it's been designed, I just think it doesn't need it. But I am totally a with in Rage Gamer. I think the DLCs do need to have that sustenance and connection to the AC universe. And this just means that if they put in Eivor's filler story now, Siege of Paris has to, by right, be an endgame only DLC, and it has to have a lot of connections that are worthwhile, and in my opinion should have some connections to Unity through a Sword of Eden. But that's for another episode. We are still quite a long way away from when the Siege of Paris releases. On the 12th of this month, we do have Ubisoft Connect, which would be today technically as this episode is released. But as I'm recording this 2 days before, I still don't think Siege of Paris will be at Ubisoft Connect. So, as a challenge to everyone, if you watch Ubisoft Connect and Siege of Paris is released, I will also be amazed. But quote this podcast saying, on the 10th of this month, I predicted Siege of Paris wouldn't be there. And say, look, AC, let's talk. On the 10th of your recording of the Druids DLC, you said it wouldn't be there, and it is there. Just quote me on it, because I just think with how Druids was delayed, and all information for the Druids wasn't released till 3 weeks before the DLC drops, and it's only been a month since the Druids have dropped, I think Siege of Paris is way, 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 way too early. We should see Siege of Paris details end of July, start of August for an August release date. If there's a delay, end of August for a September release date. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you for your continued support with the show. If you'd like to talk about this episode and any other episodes, then please find me on Twitter at ACLetsTalk, or you can email me at assassinscreedletstalk@gmail.com. If you would like to get involved with the show or any topic ideas you would like to hear discussed, please reach out to me on social media and my email, and I'll see you all next week.